And away we go. You can hear me, right?
I can hear you. I cannot see you.
Oh.
Which I probably should have made you aware of before we started to record.
What the fuck?
I mean, we're talking about some surreal content, so maybe it's better this is audio only.
Can you see me now?
I can.
All right, there we go. Yeah, we're going to be talking about Atlanta today, the FX television show Atlanta, which you and I discussed offline. We've been doing a lot of FX content for whatever reason. No sponsorship, but, for some reason we're just interested in that right now, or we've seen a lot of their content.
Well, I think FX, in addition to, probably in equal parts HBO and to a slightly lesser extent Showtime, have been sort of the pioneer production studios and distributors of a lot of the high quality TV shows of the last 20 years. FX, in particular, sort of took the mantle away from AMC, who had a number of the sort of prestige TV or most popular shows from the mid 2000s, and since they kind of fell off with the end of Mad Men and Breaking Bad, FX has been the one that has more consistently been putting out not only weird TV shows, but ones that mess with the formula of TV, mess with the conventions of episodic structure, playing with narrative, just really doing something different than, what the traditional CBS or Fox 1 hour TV dramas would be doing.
Speaking of which, we have a show that is spearheaded by a rapper, a black artist, and it's not every day that two white guys sit down to discuss a TV show that is primarily black actors and black artists, which this show is. That said, we're just gonna come out and acknowledge that from the get-go. Obviously, you can make fun of us, you can say that we're crazy or we don't know what we're talking about. But one of the reasons we wanted to discuss this show is, one, we very much enjoy the show, first and foremost. But two, we think that the show is doing something much different than a lot of its constituents, as well as historically other shows that would be regarded as being similar. That said, I think you and I would probably agree that it is probably doing its own thing in a lot of ways. Like, there's not really any show that is a good comp to it.
Yeah, Donald Glover himself compared the show to Twin Peaks sometime, I think, during the release of the first season by saying this is Twin Peaks but with rappers. And I think that's just a good way to sort of explain away a lot of the more surreal or nightmarish elements and a lot of the offbeat pacing, strange interactions that are sort of held within a sustained tension from start to finish within the show. I wouldn't necessarily even agree with the description, but I think it does simplify down more than what the show is capable of getting across, both artistically and emotionally.
It's a bit reductive.
Yes. And so because of that, I would say that people who enjoyed Twin Peaks would not inherently enjoy this show and vice versa.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I think for people who get a lot out of Twin Peaks, they would also get a lot out of Atlanta, as long as they're not just, sort of explicitly racist and refuse to engage with material not only about the black culture of Atlanta, but more largely with black rappers and the music industry in general. But as a thesis, I don't know how I would describe it, but what I think the show is most clearly trying to convey in its use of surrealism and nightmarish plots and very uncomfortable scenarios for all characters involved in the show is a continued sense of discomfort that these characters, and by extension the writers, have in the real world as a result of race. And so the show acts as a conduit to express these emotional ideas, which I think it does very effectively in sort of trying to explain what it is to be like to be black in a predominantly white America. And that discomfort that they feel is then, to us whiteys over here, a great way for us to try to experience the same level of discomfort they would feel and be able to accept that tension exists, and not necessarily like this isn't some textbook for like you watch it and then you're not racist, or or like you watch it and then suddenly, oh, I understand now. Like now I can be an ally too, because the show directly spits on those notions. Like there is no simple path to being, progressive or accepting,
The
because
gang solves racism.
exactly, yeah, that's a good parallel running idea from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. But yeah, I wanted to just sort of get that idea out there. In addition to the notion that I myself feel a coward for not using some of the more profane language used in the show, particularly the N-word, when discussing it, because I think to have any sort of deeper conversation about race in the U.S., you have to be able to engage with the words for what they are. But I don't want to be either labeled as a hate monger or demonetized, or it's just better to, I suppose, avoid it at this moment in time in this place.
Yeah, I think I very much appreciate that the show is deconstructing race in America, but it's also opening dialogue, I would say, in many different ways, between people in Black culture, but also between whites and blacks. I would say there is a lot of dialogue that can be opened because of this, because of a lot of moments in the show. But I also really appreciate, I'm going to try to capture this, but I feel like you and I talked off air that, excuse me, the show is a meta-analysis of race, but it is not for the sake of saying it has the moral high ground on race. Very much so, it's coming at race relations and showing it from all sorts of different angles, that it is very messy, and people being dehumanized or made uncomfortable, or in general being scared, and rightly so, is not like outlining, oh, we know how to solve race relations. Like I don't necessarily think that the show is making that message clear. I think it gives examples, but it also is very clearly outlining that this is problematic, and also is never really going to be solved unless people come to the table and try to actually have dialogue and work through the mess, the historical shit, the present shit, and actually do something about it.
I do think it does implicitly address the core cause of a lot of racial tension and a lot of the animosity long term.
Yeah,
and
the
it all
cause
has to do with money and the transaction of capital, and the way in which, I mean, obviously for Black Americans, specifically African Americans, most of them are in the US because their ancestors were forcibly taken here and then used as free labor through the horrors of slavery. And that current of abuse that is basically just a function of let's own people because of profit is the same type of profit motive that functions throughout Atlanta's narrative, which is more kind of involved with like hurt people, and the cycles of abuse that are all caused by the need to make money, and how you make money for yourself and for your own, and the sort of loss of identity in that process, despite, being linked to the entertainment industry and the music industry, where you need to have a very strong identity to market forward in order to make said profit. But it's all propped up by like the main character's name is earn, literally earn, like need to earn money. The rapper's name Paperboy, literally about making paper. Like these are the
paper boy, all about that paper boy. And then Darius.
Yeah, the soul of the show.
Is Van a vehicle then? She just a vehicle?
She is a vehicle for ideas, that's for sure.
I'm just working on deconstructing their names now. No, I do think you're right though, that it is in large part like while it does have commentary on race within America, a huge aspect of it does come back to money and the American dream, and how the American dream has evolved, I guess, or devolved. But like the American dream nowadays, basically the requirements to fulfill the American dream for someone who is African American basically is showing that you must give up your identity and then bastardize your own culture in order to be successful, basically. I think is like one of the main messages of the show. And I mean, who better to literally create this content than a successful rapper, Childish Gambino? Like, if you haven't figured out that Donald Glover is Childish Gambino, that's him, the driving force of the show.
Yeah, Donald Glover was the creator of the show, the primary writer of the show, the showrunner, and the lead actor. So everything flows from him. I mean, just as a short backstory, like Glover got his start as a writer on 30 Rock, which he parlayed into a main cast role on the same network NBC sitcom series Community. And then from Community, he started recording music under the Childish Gambino moniker. And then basically that just became successful. I think by the time his third album was out, he was like a pretty big successful artist. And I think it was after Awaken My Love that he then started making Atlanta. And then from that point on, basically concurrently running between the releases of Atlanta and the releases of the Childish Gambino music, he's become wildly successful. And now that the show's been over for over 2 years, I think he's like wrapping up his career as Childish Gambino.
Nice
Sounds
pun.
like he's done making music that way. And I guess in the future he'll be releasing stuff under his own name. I'm not entirely sure, but all of that sort of context is necessary to understand that Donald Glover has worked in TV specifically and primarily in a lot of comedy TV, both as a writer and an actor. So he has a lot of experience. And then his role in becoming, a successful rapper is sort of the chief content to mine inspiration from throughout the show. So a lot of it feels very autobiographical in that way, or that's a huge part of my reading of the show, and presumably the intended reading of the show is autobiographically what Donald Glover went through with the struggles in his identity as Childish Gambino.
Yeah, and he's using that as a vehicle to maneuver through these ideas. That said, he is not the rapper in the show. Paperboy is the rapper, played by Bryan Tyree Henry. Yeah, Bryan Tyree Henry. And Earn eventually, like, he is his, what's the word, agent, right?
He's his cousin, and in the pilot episode, he propositions to him, his name's Alfred in the show, Earn and Al. He propositions that he wants to be his manager.
Yeah, manager. That's the word. Cool. So now that we've sort of laid all of that groundwork out there,
the context, yeah.
You've done quite the background of figuring out sort of like how to approach breaking down the episodes. You want to go into detail about the different like categories that we're going to work our way through, or just kind of get into each of them?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's more or less these categories I came up with are just an easy way to sort of block out the different types of episodes into something manageable for discussion's sake. The show is a lot closer to being an anthology, like, The Twilight Zone, or to a lesser extent, the season-to-season differences between Fargo, than it is a normal sort of narrative, week after week, the plot progresses drama. Just funny to then that it would be self-described by Glover as something akin to Twin Peaks, which is very much a serialized week-to-week narrative that follows one story. So yeah, the types of episodes that I highlighted, which do in some way follow with the differences between seasons, is I basically made 3 distinct categories of episodes, which would be the In the Streets episodes, the music business episodes, and then race debate episodes. So the In the Streets episodes typically are ones where the characters or occasionally unnamed other characters in a one-off story have to live with and deal with an everyday experience wandering around in the city of Atlanta. Whereas the music business episodes tend to focus on the struggles of attempting to become a famous or successful rapper and everything that leads from that, be that parties, because there's many like parties and events attended by the characters throughout the show, concerts themselves, poor interactions with fans, the way in which the fans try to feed off of them, the basketball game episode, and then the race episodes. And the race episodes are typically about creating sort of a, as I describe them, caustic, psychedelic bad trip vibe where one or more characters have to endure the brunt of race relations in America and in the one season European culture. These are not hard and fast descriptions, and many of the episodes cover all three categories. In fact, I would argue the best episodes are indescribable and don't fit well into any of the categories. I don't know if you wanted to actually talk about each and every single episode, or if you just kind of wanted to talk about the best episodes that might fit all three categories, or the best that, you know, might fit an individual category, or if you just wanted to talk about your favorites.
Yeah, I've kind of gone back and forth between highlighting the favorite episodes or literally working like episode by episode through the different buckets, kind of like plucking them out one by one. I think that would take too long. I'm glad we're not working through every single episode here, because we've done that in the past, and I think it's just like not conducive to great discussion, I guess. Like the point of our show is not to summarize. Like, it's not a summary based show. I would rather kind of discuss the larger concepts. So as far as like discussing that, I think we could kind of discuss what aspects we think the episodes do well for each category. So like In the Streets episodes, if we start working our way through those, what aspects are being shown through these episodes, and like kind of referencing the episode itself based on what happens as exemplars. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah, it does. Well, I guess I'll like quite a few of these episodes are very similar to dreams. So I mentioned earlier that the show takes on a very surreal like nature, and part of that starts with not only the camera work, the editing style, and the direction of every episode, but with how they're written like dreams. They're all situations where one of the characters is just sort of dropped into the middle of Atlanta and then has some arbitrary goal they have to meet, and it's just one absurd and strange interaction after the other, impeding them in their progress to do this. So this starts as simple in the first season as Al and Darius going to buy drugs from Migos, and then gets it as advanced as, you know, like a couple episodes later where Ern and Darius trade up from Ern's phone to a puppy that will pay off in 10 months because it's some prize winning puppy breed. Like there's an episode where they just go to a strip club and have a bad time. There's an episode where Ern loses his jacket, which had a phone inside of it, and he just needs the phone back, and he goes on an odyssey to get it. There's a great episode called Barbershop where Al just goes to get a haircut and is forced to endure like a chaotic odyssey of violence and theft because his barber Bibby is just a debaucherous maniac.
holy shit, yeah.
Or
like isn't the whole thing like he keeps like sitting down and he's like, oh come on bro, like you just gotta cut my hair, and he's just like, nah man, like I can't do that yet, we gotta figure this shit out.
Yeah, because he like takes him to another client's house, then he goes to like a baby mama's house, then he takes him to a construction site which he robs. They stop for lunch, but the place is closed. Like there's a number of those episodes. There's an even better episode called Woods where Al basically is just wandering the streets of Atlanta and is unfortunately reminded that the streets can be dangerous because everyone is out to get theirs. even with him being at this point famous through at least Atlanta. And so he's like robbed by fans of his, and then he has like a series of surreal, nightmarish interactions in the woods with people who seem to be ghosts. Part of it is that the show it's aware that because it's a TV show, it takes on a dreamlike nature. Part of it is that the characters are constantly under the influence of weed. And so that's always kind of like in the background of, oh, right, they're just high. Maybe that is part of the experience of these interactions. Like when you're high, it makes them even loopier.
Mm-hmm.
Or some other these great sort of in the streets episodes. There's a few of them in Europe because season 3 is all about their tour in Europe. One is just called New Jazz, where Darius forces Al to eat some space cakes, which are just potent edibles of some variety, which causes Al to like lose track of time, have an identity crisis, and then just like turn into Goofy.
Good God, yeah. That one is a wild episode.
The Fubu one? What is Fubu? Oh, that's a flashback episode. And then, yeah, I mean, the final episode of the show, It Was All a Dream, I would argue is kind of in the same vein. I don't want to get to that one yet, though, because that's kind of a good, like, wrapping up episode to talk about.
I definitely want to talk about the gun in the airport one, because that one seems like extremely critical for like what the show is trying to convey, while also being like a microcosm of like the problems with being black in America, basically.
Crabs in a barrel.
Yeah, crabs in a barrel. So basically, like the sort of like main conflict in this episode is they're trying to go off to Europe, which you referenced, and Paperboy's going on tour in Europe, and Ern has a golden gun which he gets from Alligator Man, I'm pretty sure.
His,
like,
this is
uncle.
at the beginning of the season. Yeah, he meets Cat Williams, his uncle, and has to take his unregistered golden gun from him.
Which you think is just like a funny bit, but then it builds in culmination with him putting it in his backpack, which he then forgot about because he had to like go off and do some bullshit before he goes on the flight. And you, the audience, know at the beginning of the episode, like, oh, he puts this gun in his backpack, and you're like, oh God, wait, he's gonna go on a plane ride later. And of course he forgets about it until he's in line going through TSA. And every single time I fly now, I literally think back to this episode. I don't have any guns to take through TSA, but like my anxiety is always just considering like, God damn, like imagine you're going through TSA and you forgot you just had a golden gun with you. But basically, like he decides to, like, in discovering it, because he opens his bag to like take his ID out or something, and he sees it in there and obviously freaks out. But he puts it in this other guy's bag, doesn't he? He puts it in Clark's bag.
The guy right behind him in line.
Yeah, and so they get on the plane, right? Because he disposed of the golden gun, and Al looks at him and he's like, I saw what you did. You ain't got to say shit. And he says, just know that's exactly what I'm talking about. Friends don't care about us, man. Friends are going to do whatever they got to do to survive because they ain't got no choice. We ain't got no choice either. You're my family, Ern. You're the only one that knows what I'm about. You give a fuck, and I need that. And I think that basically is showing that in America, you have to do what you have to do to survive, and in most cases, that means fucking someone else over, basically, when problems arise.
Hence the description of the title of the episode, Crabs in a Barrel. The only way to get out of the barrel full of crabs as a crab is to pull more in. And then the haunting realization of Ern in that moment is when Clark gets on the plane.
Yeah,
because
I was going to say.
Then did the same shit and move the gun into the next guy's bag.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the huge payoff, is that Clark then gets on the plane and you can just see in his eyes, Ern is like, wait, what the fuck? How did he get in here?
And then that guy's just never in the show again.
Yeah.
But that's also the time. There's a 4-year time gap release between the end of season 2 and the beginning of season 3. which is actually part of the reason we didn't talk about this show years ago, because I, idiot that I am, forgot the show came back and finished, because this is like one of my favorite TV shows ever. I think this show is great, and like I watched it as it aired, and then just didn't watch it for 4 years. It came back out in 5, 6, so it's been like 6, 7, 8 years since I watched the show.
Yeah, I think I finished watching it last year, and it's been like on our, because you and I obviously have a growing list of like content that we're gonna do, and we constantly are looking at that in order to figure out what we're gonna do next. And it was on that list forever until we finally looked at it and we were like, oh shit, yeah, we should probably do this since we both love the show, and you hadn't yet finished it. But yeah, I mean, I just think that episode in and of itself is a huge, because that happens at the end of season 2, right? So it's like almost like the midway point of the show itself. It's basically a midpoint to kind of like tether the different motifs thematically with what it's getting after.
Yeah, it's a decisive moment for Ern as a character, where he's finally made the conscious decision that he's willing to ruin someone else's life to ensure that his own continues on the path he wants.
Yeah, exactly. Because like up until that point, you haven't really seen him do anything morally deplorable. Like he's been conflicted many times, but he hasn't necessarily acted on that for the most part. But yeah, like it's just the perfect setup, because in order for them to actually get on the plane, right, in order for them to actually, for him to progress his own career as well as the career of his cousin, his rap artist, he has to fuck someone else over. I apologize if I disrupted things. I guess that one probably was not the In the Streets one. That was more for the music business, but
I mean, it's a mix of both. It's the reason why these categories are quite arbitrary. Like, some episodes, you can clearly tell were not written by Donald Glover. They were either written by his brother, who wrote quite a few episodes, or by Stefani Robinson, who is another producer and lead writer for quite a few episodes. And so some of those occasionally can like jut out a little more, or feel like they fit very specifically into one of these categories, as if it was like, I want to write an episode about race and I'm going to do that. Yeah, I think those are some of the best episodes of the show, are the ones that are just like very pointedly not within the narrative of the rest of the show. They exist wholly outside of it, specifically just so that the show can be a mouthpiece for some of Glover's either funnier or more serious ideas, like the BAN episode, where Al goes on a talk show on the fake BAN network and argues with a feminist about race and gender issues, because she like accuses him basically of being a misogynist, and he's like, I'm not a misogynist. This is like the way I talk to express myself. These words have different meanings to me than they may to you. And they eventually come to an agreement, essentially, over free speech. And she comes to realize like where he is really coming from with why he speaks the way he does. And then BAN shows a segment on a transracial guy who's just like a 20-year-old black guy who identifies as a 35-year-old white man. And after the segment ends, Al just bursts out laughing, and he's like, nah, that's not real. I don't believe in that shit at all. And obviously it's meant to be a stand-in for like some of the more aggressive anti-trans stuff that rappers, tend to harp on. But it works so effectively because like conceptually is just so absurd, and it's still related to the same idea of, rappers being whatever it may be, homophobic or misogynistic, and just the disparity between the world.
Right. There is this culminating piece where they've reached some type of agreement, and then he's just like, yeah, but that shit, no, I'm not about that. We are somewhat jumping around here, but
we're off the path. No structure now.
that's okay.
From the woods to the plain to wherever. We can talk about any. I mean, this like my favorite episodes of the show would be like the Juneteenth episode. Ern and Van attend a Juneteenth party for someone Van knows, and the white guy who owns the house, who's married to a black woman, is just the ultimate like rich white guy, black fetishist who celebrates Juneteenth like really specifically, and he asks Ern, like, "Oh, you haven't been to Africa? Where are you from? How have you not been there?" Like the whole conversation takes place with "Awaken My Love," the Childish Gambino album, right behind the guy's head.
Basically, as if to say that. Well, not as if to say, they're literally saying like there are white people out there who claim that they know more about black people and black culture because they've either been to Africa or they do something for African people or African American people. And then they're just like very confused, like, wait, why don't you know this? Like, why don't you know this vague aspect? Like, you don't even know this aspect about your background or something. It's like, dude, just because you're African American doesn't mean you're familiar with Africa. Like, what the fuck? Or that you would necessarily have been there or are interested in even going there. It's just like the episode just perfectly breaks down how ignorant and also like assumptive people can be just about other races, basically, and then also how racist they come across when saying these things.
Oh, it definitely highlights that like an intellectualization of black media and arts can lead to you being just as racist as someone that's openly calling you a slur.
Didn't he like write a book as well? Didn't he like come out with some book? I thought in the episode. I thought, yeah.
I mean, it's just a different type of ownership. Hence, him owning the album. Like he's trying to take away his, Ern's own culture by knowing more about it than he does.
Oh, very uncomfortable. Yes. Yeah.
Or the even better episode one season later called North of the Border, where the group goes to a college campus to perform a show.
Jesus
and then
Christ.
Because of Al's friend Tracy, who's just a maniac, in every episode he's in causes a fight. And so they end up having to hide out deep on campus at a frat, which is just covered in Confederate flags. And the racists they find within are completely obsessed with. They're in the middle of like some brutal ritualistic hazings. And so they put on, what is it, Laffy Taffy?
Yeah. I think it is Laffy Taffy.
And then the one guy that puts it on, who's just like, hilariously racist.
Which is exactly what the show does, like hilariously racist. Like it makes you openly laugh at the racists within the show. Like that is one of the points of the show, because it's so sad and scary, but it makes it funny for you.
Well, it helps that like it's all packed within this very surreal veneer.
Mm-hmm.
Like the way in which they arrive there and are then subjected to these horrors. Like all four of the characters cannot really believe what they're looking at, because it's just like too absurd to believe. And then the cherry on top of the cake is them playing Laffy Taffy and pointing at the audience, you Whitey in the audience, and going, "Hey, we know that you've listened to this Laffy Taffy song, you racist piece of shit."
Yeah.
And Laffy Taffy is a banger song. There is something the genius writing to come up with that dissonance of playing that song in a frat in Georgia with the Confederate flag in the background.
Yeah, like a clear vision in mind. Pure cinema.
Yeah, there's a handful of episodes then we haven't discussed any of in the third season, which are all removed from the narrative. They don't feature any of the main characters. I liked all of these. We kind of talked about these briefly off air. There's one about a white guy who's sued for reparations, and just his life is completely ruined by his ancestors having owned slaves, and he has to like pay back his like neighbors because he owned their ancestors.
The big paycheck.
Yeah, the big paycheck. Yeah. 3 Slaps, which is just based on a real thing that happened where a young black kid is, due to a series of misunderstandings, removed from his home and sent to live with a foster home, which is these 2 white lesbian ladies who are just basically malnourishing and mistreating several other young black kids. And then at the end of the episode, like the black kids know and communicate non-verbally with each other, like, holy shit, these crazy white bitches are gonna kill us, which is a real thing that happened. I forget, it was like the Hart family suicides or something. These 2 white ladies killed a bunch of black foster kids, but thankfully in the show, since it is a fantasy show, they're able to get out, and so the white ladies just kill themselves.
They pull a Tarantino.
Yes, they changed the course of history. There's Trini to Debone, which is another great episode where
this one might be one of my like top 5 ones, just because of the situation that they get in.
Oh, definitely. The whole thing is shot like a horror film.
Because it is a fucking horror film.
It's a nice story. When you remove all the scary like scene setting elements, it's actually heartwarming. Yeah, this white family's like son's nanny, Trini, dies, and she's Trinidadian, and they go to her funeral, and just a bunch of chaos ensues. It's implied that their home is being haunted by her ghost, and they keep receiving weird packages in the mail that I guess are threats because someone in her family wants them to pay them money because they took her away from her own family when they needed her. Instead, she was too busy raising their kid, who has himself become culturally Trinidadian. He's like a little kid.
Yeah, this little kid is more Trinidadian than he is white, but he is just a white kid.
Sorry, I am still listening. I just need to fetch some water.
No, you're good. I mean, that's a pretty good lead into the rich W N-word, poor W N-word, which is a light-skinned black teenager in high school is not black enough to receive a new scholarship from a wealthy alumni. This one is in black and white, from what I remember. I'm pretty sure it is in black and white. It feels almost like a Black Mirror episode, but instead of it being on technology, it's a Black Mirror episode on race, is how I would describe it. It's really good. It's one of my personal favorites, and it's also extremely dark.
Yeah, and it ends with it like there's a sort of Kafka-esque scene where he's pulled into an all dark room, and this rich alumni and like the school guidance counselor are like 20 feet above him, acting as judge, jury, and executioner, and they question him on his blackness, and he doesn't know the answer to these questions, and the questions are absurd. They're like, what flavor of licorice do you like? Like, what do you call this thing or that thing? Like, what's the correct way to make fried chicken? And like he answers the questions incorrectly.
Because those are clearly defining characteristics of what makes someone black.
Yeah.
This is how you're black. The correct flavor or the correct way of preparing. Yeah.
And then in an act of desperation, knowing he will not be able to go to college because he doesn't have any money and no scholarship, he decides to burn the school down, which is some sort of analogy to, I suppose, in some way, school shootings, but also great reference to something like Donnie Darko. But when he goes to the school to do it with a makeshift flamethrower, he runs into another student who is a very dark-skinned Nigerian boy who also failed the test because he is literally from Nigeria.
So he wouldn't know these answers.
And so they like chase each other around and try to burn each other. And it ends with the Nigerian student being shot. And then the alumni guy comes up and just awards him with the scholarships, telling him like, yeah, I mean, nothing is blacker than being shot by the police, which is just the perfect encapsulation of the type of mood this show creates. Something that is darkly serious, played for comedic effect to sort of deaden the arrival of this conclusion. Really, really masterclass of tone.
Yes.
And that we've made it this far without mentioning yet the main other creative element behind the making of this show, which is Hiro Murai, who's a director who directed 26 of the episodes, which is the bulk of the whole series. His framework for how to direct an episode, with everything coming down to small uses of camera work, the intense lighting, which is something in between Lynchian lighting and Kubrickian lighting, an acute sense of shooting so that everything can be edited together very seamlessly, alienating most of the main characters, or particularly in these standalone episodes, alienating just the subject of the either Twilight Zone or Black Mirror scenario that has been created. I think a lot of that came from, at first, Murai's direction, and then later on, Donald Glover started directing more episodes. I think he directed 9 in total. And that's something like, between the two of them, that's 80% of the show, not more.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that Hiro Murai directed one of the most successful This Is America, which, when that shit came out, was just a complete just a cultural wave across the country, which came out like over the course of Atlanta being released as well.
Yeah,
I forget when it came out, but I think it was like 2021, something like that.
I have no idea. The success of their creative collaboration cannot be understated. They obviously work exceedingly well together.
Oh shit, that came out in 2018.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure it was out when the show was out. I think it was released in conjunction with the second season at some point, which helped in some way to make the show even that much more relevant, since the song was far more than the show.
Mm-hmm. All right, where are we going from here?
Just more episodes to highlight. There's The Goof Who Sat by the Door, which is a fake mockumentary played again on the fake BAN channel, which is a mockumentary about a black guy in the 90s who is accidentally voted in as the CEO of Disney. Yeah. Which is, I don't know if Glover came up with that concept alone, or if it is something that has just been in the culture for a while, but the entire thing is excellent, and it still makes great use of the filmmakers in this series' ability to play around tonal wise with everything, jumping between very serious moments that help criticize Disney, which is in and of itself hilarious given how much work Glover has done for Disney over recent years. But then jumping back and forth between, these insane criticisms, just actual jokes, and then framing the whole thing through, they made the Goofy movie right after the Rodney King riots in LA.
Oh my God. Yeah, while the show, I mean, it's also worth noting that the show is like a meta narrative in and of itself, in like embracing and grabbing the Goofy movie in a way, like taking ownership of this like back for Black culture as well.
Yeah, there's I think the only other major episode I want to single out before I get to sort of one of the other points of the show we haven't brought up yet is the Teddy Perkins episode, which...
Yeah, I was going to say we need to talk about that one.
I imagine that is probably the most famous episode of the show, if not the most critically lauded episode of the show, which features Darius, who we've also barely talked about. He goes to the middle of the woods to buy a piano from some sort of reclusive, retired musician, who is this fellow by the name of Teddy Perkins, who is a Black man who's undergone surgery to appear white, like Michael Jackson, and then chaos ensues as this man is clearly unwell. It's meant to be some kind of stand-in for the abuse suffered at the hands of many famous Black artists, with Michael Jackson being the most obvious example because of what he did to his own skin. But, there's clear references also to what happened to Marvin Gaye. And in general, just the Jackson family on the whole, the way in which they were raised to be successful artists, and the trauma that begets trauma that can create greatness, but still is just surrounded by suffering, which is one of the clear major themes of the show as the whole.
Yeah, you have to change yourself in order to become successful, or you have to like subvert yourself or invert yourself to be successful, and the identity issues that result from that, and the complete destruction of your own self. It's a trade-off, basically.
Yeah, and that is one of the other core narrative elements of the show, is the different ways in which identity is discussed and wrestled with between Al, Earn, and Van in very different ways. For Al, it's the distinction between who he is as an individual and who he wants to be as a man, as opposed to the crafted persona of Paperboy, which he dislikes but embraces in order to be successful. Something he does well before Earn ever does, whereas Earn is not able to sort of embrace and change his identity to be a darker person, someone more capable of doing evil deeds to become successful, which is more commented on in the third season once Al realizes what this has done to Earn, even though Earn has now helped Al to become more successful. There's a great episode early in the show, Nobody Beats the Beebs, where Al plays in a charity basketball game with Justin Bieber, who in universe is a young black man. And throughout it, there's a subtextual narrative in the identity crisis that both Earn and Al are going through, where Al is struggling to be himself different than Paperboy, and he's forced to embrace Paperboy as sort of this villainous gangster rapper character that he doesn't want to portray that way, because he doesn't want to, hurt the image of black people or portray all blacks as gangsters. Where Earn, at the same time, is mistaken for someone else by this random white lady, and then, essentially has to eventually tell her, no, I'm not the guy you think I am, you racist piece of shit. Whereas at the end of the episode, Al is told by a different white lady, who I think is the Justin Bieber's manager, hey, you need to play the bad guy, know your role. So in each case, a white woman tells the other character who their identity is supposed to be. And so neither of them are able to organically sort of make that decision for themselves.
Yeah, I think it is, before we get, because we've talked a good bit about Earn and Al. I think we should probably get into some of the stuff between Earn and Van, because we haven't really talked too much about Van, who is the fourth sort of main character in the show, and then circle back to Darius, who is my personal favorite character, which is probably a based take, but I don't care.
Wait, why is that a based take? You mean basic take?
Yeah, or both.
I think it's based. Darius is clearly the best character. I mean, he's literally self-aware that he's in a TV show, and he's just a super chill guy. So
yeah, that's why it's based, is because it's just so painfully obvious. But anyway, Van and Earn's relationship, basically these two, there are several episodes of them in love, trying to convince one another that they're in love, and trying to convince themselves that this relationship is worth it. But also throughout the course of the show, it kind of shows how their relationship declines, but they also are still friends, checking in on each other, hey, are you good? No, I'm not good. Or yeah, I'm fine, is typically the answer that Earn typically says. Yeah. In addition to that, Van also does accuse Earn quite frequently of only sort of being involved with their relationship in order for him to get sex out of her, which does also seem to be the case most of the time.
Yeah, certainly, at least through the first two seasons. Yeah, I think a lot of those moments are the most tender and honest moments of the show, with regards to trying to explain how having children and trying to raise a family in the midst of all the rest of this chaos works.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes the world itself will get in the way of Earn's attempts to try to be honest with Van, and that frustrates him, and then he sort of uses these racist or otherworldly moments as an excuse for why he isn't treating Van well, which, to the frustration of Van, and probably in dramatic irony for the audience, Van just plays up as, oh, fuck you, Earn, how dare you. It's not just because they're being racist.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
And it isn't really until the fourth season that they eventually are able to connect and really solidify what they want to get out of their relationship together that is not so transactional in nature. The way that each of them have learned throughout this world of Atlanta, the whole place is transactional by nature. Everything about the sacrifices they make is that way. And so they have to learn how to come together to help their daughter, Lottie, who is a very minor character for most of the show. She kind of plays a major role in one of my least favorite episodes, Work Ethic. But yeah, there's the terrare. I don't know how to pronounce that word because it's a goddamn French word. Terrare.
I don't know. Just keep going. Just move past it.
I can't just thinking about how much I hate French people.
I mean, there is a word that's terroir, which is spelled differently. That's the complete natural environment in which a particular wine is produced. But anyway, it may be in reference to that.
I think this is in reference to some mythological, like some myth of a guy who eats hands.
Got it.
Which is also then what the episode is about. Van runs into one of her friends from a previous episode while she is living in Paris at the end of season 3. And she's pretending to be Parisian. Like she has a very affected French accent, like French English accent, and leads her friend and her friend's friends on some sort of strange, almost Park Chan-wook like journey through Paris to find some mysterious package, which, as it turns out, is human hands, which are meant to be eaten by a group of elite white people. But then the climax of the episode is the people eating the hands and the friends of the friend eat the hands, and they're like, nah, we're not eating hands. What is this fucked up shit? And Van herself having an emotional breakdown when finally being reminded that she's like not living in Atlanta, not looking after her daughter. And so she reveals that she thought about killing herself and Lottie at some point, and that is why she decided to just up and move to Europe, because she's like, I can't deal with those emotions. Like, I can't deal with thinking about dying and also being responsible for the life of someone else.
Yeah.
Then the friend pisses on a guy for money, and that's the end of the season, which is in front of the Eiffel Tower, which again is one of those perfect chef's kiss artistic moments that the show just excels at.
I do love how the show both plays with understatement and then shock factor, almost in the same scene. It will do something that's really emotionally impactful, and then the next scene is just oh yeah, and then this lady just pisses on a guy. And then the episode ends and you're like, oh, what did I just experience?
Yeah, I mean, that work ethic episode I cited as being one of my least favorite is easily the least subtle episode of the series, where Van takes Lottie to some combination of a Medea film factory and also Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, where
Mr. Chocolate,
yeah,
Mr. Chocolat,
Donald Glover plays a mostly off-screen Mr. Chocolate, who is some mysterious but heralded as genius filmmaker who just makes what is evidently just trash blaxploitation movies for mass consumption. And he attempts to basically kidnap, buy, or bribe Lottie from Van, which just ends with Van throwing hot grits in Donald Glover's face while he's wearing a hilarious prosthetics fat suit. It's a strange episode. At least it is very funny, and the disorienting nature of it still works throughout. But I figured I'd mention that just as to what you just said, with that just ridiculous hitting you over the head, slapping you with hot grits moment.
Yeah, it's not directly calling out Tyler Perry, but it's some strange Tyler Perry-esque person. Yeah.
Well, I think from reading Stefani Robinson's Wikipedia that she's a big fan of Willy Wonka, and it feels like they're calling out Tyler Perry in the mode of Willy Wonka, the way that Willy Wonka calls out the mass production of products.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't necessarily know that much about Tyler Perry, so I can't really comment on that. I don't know if he sits up in his booth and just comes through a microphone and tells them strangely what to do. But I think this is a good pause point, so we will be right back. Starting recording. And we're back. You can see me?
I can.
Now you see me. Okay. Yeah, so we left off talking about sort of like Van and Ern's relationship. So we'll probably move into discussing Darius and then sort of like capstoning the show and then hopefully not derailing too much um, towards the end. But we'll give you our final thoughts on Atlanta. I think it is worth noting. I know we started off the show. We can both be a bit hypercritical at times. Obviously, we're critical people, but this show, you and I both just love so much. I do think it's also worth noting. We haven't mentioned this, but just the fact that, you know, you and I are white and we have discussions with people quite frequently about like rap or like I haven't really talked that much at length with people about Atlanta because honestly, not many people that I talk to have seen it. But we talked off air that there is a concept. It's uncomfortable to say, but with white people that white people like rap, and there's a huge enclave or huge group of people who enjoy rap, but they like it from like a distance where they like the music, obviously, but then also black culture is like this other thing. Like they like it because they're othering black people, which I think the show acknowledges quite well and digs into by and large quite well. Obviously, there is no white character, no white main character, which is clearly purposeful, and I'm glad there isn't. But I do think that there is something there worth noting that like most of the white characters in the show are a vehicle for either making the characters uncomfortable or in highlighting how white people completely misunderstand black culture in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I have a couple points to sort of build off of. one one would be that it's hard for us to understand because we don't live it. We don't live in a world where we feel this alienated way where
Yes.
people are looking at us like animals or like aliens.
Yeah.
Where everything we do is under a microscope. That's one element of it. The second element to build off of what you said is like not only is it an othering, it's a fetishization. Like there's something about it that is, meant to be I appreciate it and therefore like I'm better for doing it. Like there's not only the fetishization via virtue signaling, there's the fetishization via the like it makes me feel cool. Like
Yes.
to enjoy gangster rap makes me feel cool. And that can be as simple as, you or I or friends of ours enjoying it.
Right, sitting
And
around having a couple brews, watching music videos and vibing.
yeah, and then it can go from that all the way to like, 50 Cent having many men play for Donald Trump as he raises his arm and talks about being shot. Like there's something about it where inherently for white people, there's something about black culture that is cool that white people can't get to. And so the enjoyment of the music is in some way their attempt to share the experience and feel cool. But the whole point of it is that this culture and all of this great black art that we have through the 20th century and now into the 21st century is something that we can find to be cool because we can't understand it. We don't have that experience. And I mean, that's certainly a big part of Atlanta. And we've talked about that. I will add, based off of what you said, the fact that this is an all black writers room, which is like this doesn't happen in American TV. I mean, probably in TV in general. And I think because of that, Atlanta, not only because of its subject matter, but because of the people that help make it, is a distinctly black American show that sort of ascends or transcends some of its predecessors, which would probably start with something as simple as the Cosby Show, which for a lot of people was the first major show that featured a predominantly black cast on TV. And for all the issues that have come out of the Cosby Show just because of
Right.
because of Bill Cosby, The show itself still marks for a lot of older black men or older black women, I'm sure to some degree. And that older being, probably above 50, that was probably a seminal show for them just to see any form of representation. And so for Atlanta to have been made, started being made under Trump makes a lot of sense. That in the first administration, where it probably felt like a lot of black voices were being more marginalized, and then seeing Atlanta sort of finish up during the heyday of sort of strange DEI policy making decisions under the Biden administration, for us to talk about it now that all of that is being clawed back feels as relevant as ever, not because we're necessarily in support of or directly opposed to these like diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, but on the whole, having a show and more shows like Atlanta that feature entirely black casts, that feature entirely black crews and black writers' rooms is always going to be important because, these are stories that are far more interesting and engaging to me. And these are creative people that are far more interesting and better artists than quite a bit of the typical slop that we're getting. So yeah, I'm more than happy to just give this show a glowing praise and glowing reviews as opposed to my maybe more normal critical self.
Yeah, exactly. I just felt like we discussed so much of that off air that I felt like it was worth including before moving into sort of the beginning of the end discussion. So yeah, with that being said, we loosely talked about Darius, but not as much as I would like to discuss. He is an all-time great character who is sometimes has the spotlight on him, but is usually like kind of in the background with either Ern doing something or Al Paperboy figuring something out. And as you mentioned, he, with growing clarity, starts to realize that he is in a TV show, which if you didn't really put that together, I think gives you quite a different reading of his character and of what they're trying to do within the show. It's very easy to then sort of bridge that into, well, Darius's character is meant to show a black person's experience within America because they feel like they're in a show. Like there are so many eyes on them at all points in time, and they're starting to become self-aware, and they're starting to realize just how other people process them. And like Darius has some of the most like iconic outfits and like cool vibe, like energy of pretty much any character in TV, I would say, which just gets back to what you and I discussed as well. How like white people will see black culture and just be like, oh shit, like that's the epitome of cool, right? And like, look at this guy's aura, like, goddamn.
Yeah, I mean, it helps that I think Lakeith Stanfield is the most talented actor in the show.
Yeah.
And that is something that will assuredly be relayed to Americans as he begins working more and more in probably Hollywood motion pictures and in TV. I mean, a lot of the films he's been in have been a little more on the fringes, so this would be like his amazing performance in the excellent
Get Out?
No, Sorry to Bother You.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, he's great in Sorry to Bother You, which definitely recommend that movie. Holy shit.
Yeah, I mean, he does have the notable yet minor performance in Get Out, which is also a good point.
But yeah, I mean, my point in bringing him up and sort of like discussing his character in this way is that he is demonstrating what I assume, right, is a character that is becoming self-aware of their place within the world, and then also how much attention they are receiving for like what they look like, but also what they're like doing within life, or in the context of this world in Atlanta. But he also kind of just exists almost in this like ethereal, like shamanic space. Like does he have a job? Like, do they state that he has a job? Like, he just kind of like
No.
bounces around and kind of just appears at random, like willy-nilly. And then the characters constantly are like, "Oh, Darius, like, what were you up to today?" And he'll just say some shit like, I don't even know, like something out of the blue, like, "Oh yeah, I was just over in Louisiana, like wrestling alligators or something." And they're like, "What the fuck? What is your life, Darius?" What are some great moments that encapsulate that? What's that? Crank that killer.
He's a
I guess
pretty
that's more
small part of that episode.
with Al, I guess.
I mean, Darius, like the allusions to him being aware of the world they're in, which is, as you mentioned, both a cultural and a meta narrative reference on, TV as the form of this art. He always knows a guy. He always knows someone in the world that can help them accomplish something, which is typically a reference to he shows up places he shouldn't be. So I think the first notable example I can think of is the episode Champagne Poppy, which we haven't talked about because by and large it's not one of the more engaging or rich episodes.
That's the like Drake one, right?
Yeah, Van and her friends go to a mansion for a party where Drake is supposed to be. And Darius is inexplicably there, just like hanging out by the pool by himself, staring at the water. And he has some monologue which kind of makes allusion to it's like he knows.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Teddy Perkins episode is the sort of the peak of Darius's surreal experiences, and the one where he's probably given the most PTSD, which is another element we haven't really discussed within the show, like the way in which all of these characters suffer in one form or another from post-traumatic stress disorder, which Glover has talked about as an important part of the show and part of the reason why all of the characters, and as he has said, by extension, why a lot of Black Americans smoke weed, is to deal with the fact that they all have PTSD, either from, a product of their environment around them being difficult, their home lives, or just how they're fucking treated by, every white person they encounter.
Yeah, I mean, when you layer on generational trauma onto like living trauma, yeah. How much did we discuss Woods as well, just speaking of PTSD?
Not much. I just like briefly mentioned it and said, Al gets mugged by some fans and then has some trippy experiences in the woods.
Yeah, it's a great episode. Just wanted to kind of circle back to that. I know that has nothing to do with Darius, which is where we started this conversation, but
I mean, it's equal parts like him sort of still having the identity crisis, between the difference of him and Paperboy, and how him being recognized almost prevented him from being robbed, but it didn't. And then the way in which the strange spirits or people in the woods question him is a further reflection of like his fractured state of mind and the effects that this, the violence in this world has on him, the result being sort of PTSD.
Yeah, I think I do want to jump to Sinterklaas is coming to town before we get to New Jazz, because I think that leads in well with New Jazz. This one takes place in Europe. I think specifically it's supposed to be Amsterdam, right? Or at least the Netherlands on the whole.
Pretty sure they're in Amsterdam, yeah.
Yeah, and for those of you unfamiliar with Sinterklaas or Black Pete, basically the Netherlands has a tradition that includes blackface. Yeah, if you like think I'm making this up, go ahead and look it up. Just type in Schwarze Piet. Yeah, just look up Netherlands Christmas tradition blackface, and I'm sure you'll find something. But this episode culminates in a suffocation of a Tupac lookalike. Who is it that suffocates him? Is it Ern or?
No, it's no one. Van and Darius end up at this sort of like celebration of life ceremony. I don't even remember how they end up there. I think they just are mistaken. Van finds a hat in a shop and wants to know where it belongs. So she goes to a random house, and the people there mistake them for someone else, and they invite them to this celebration of life, and they just witness like this latex thing suffocate the guy. It's a horrifying scene.
Yes.
The fact that he looks like Tupac is just like one of many cultural references where, like, if you know, you know, and it adds more layers to the show.
It's unclear whether or not it's actually Tupac or a Tupac lookalike, which is pretty great. But anyway, that also leads into New Jazz, which I believe is also in Europe, correct? Yeah. So speaking of Darius and his endeavors, you could say, Darius convinces Al to eat a space cake, which is like some sort of edible, and Al trips out, showing his like struggles with identity and dislike of fame. But Darius, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure Darius is just like fine with taking the space cake.
You don't really see him much after the two of them eat it.
Right.
Well, the guy who sells them the cakes also like specifically says, like, him, I can tell he's seen the other side. Are you going to be okay? And Al's just like, whatever.
Yeah.
Then, yeah, he has a little journey.
Further implying Darius is well versed in the psychedelic experiences. But this, I think, also leads into the final, or at least one of the final episodes. No, it is the final episode, right? Season 4, episode 2, or episode 10. It was all a dream.
That is the last episode, yeah.
Yeah. So Al and Ern meet Van at a black-owned sushi restaurant to support the idea, but the sushi doesn't live up to the hype. And it's implied it doesn't because it's like it doesn't live up to the hype. It's implied that it doesn't because it's black-owned instead of, Japanese. Don't they want to go like eat fried chicken? Isn't that what like Al keeps bringing up? He's like, why don't we just go? Like, I'm really hungry. Or maybe it's Van. One of them wants to leave because they're like, yo, this doesn't look very appetizing.
No, Ern and Van are fine with going to the place and seem to like sushi more. Mm-hmm. Al is unsure about sushi as a concept, let alone it being black owned. The fact that the fact that the restaurant, which is in a what was previously a Blockbuster Video, is right across from a Popeyes.
Yeah, it's Popeyes.
Which every little symbol and detail there is important to what the episode is trying to convey.
Yeah, before we get into the symbology of it, Darius is going to his weekly isolation tank appointment, and it's shown that he keeps doing this, but then he's unconvinced that he's actually left the tank. So then you're unsure whether or not he has left the tank. And there's this incredible bit with it's thick Judge Judy, right? Which is his like inception trick of like, is the top spinning? He's like, yeah, if I look at the TV and Judge Judy is thick on there, then I know that I'm still in the isolation. But yeah, I mean, what do you find the symbolism to mean at the end of this episode?
Well, it's two-part things, and I'll finish with Darius because I think that explanation for how Darius swoops in to save them, and then the final scene of the show is sort of the part of the solution presented.
Actually, I apologize. It might be worth stating the camp out episode before we get to that.
Snipe hunt.
Yeah. Ern, Van, and Lottie, they go to camp out for Lottie's birthday, which is an excuse to discuss Ern's future with Van, basically. Which is, like, the reason I wanted to jump back to this one is because this one feels like it's the end of the show. So whenever this episode ends and then there's more episodes, you're like, wait, what? Like, what more do you have to say? Like, I thought the show was over. Because these two are with their daughter and they're literally happy, like out in nature, but also discussing like their own future, which is extremely murky and rocky.
Yeah, I mean, I would describe. I'll try to make. I'll try to get through this just so we can talk a little more about all of them. But the snipe hunt episode is just, I think, narratively the end of the show. If you view the show as like the terms of Ern coming to finally accept himself and his identity, Van accepts herself and her identity, and the two of them make a decision together for the first time. Every other moment of their relationship, one of them is making a decision and the other is forced to live with the consequences, typically bad. And so Ern wants to move to LA to further his career as a manager, and he finally convinces Van to do so because he finally shows that he is mature enough to recognize his own feelings and take into account Van's and by extension Lottie's lives as a part of his decision-making process, rather than just trying to, go out, make some choices, and then have them suffer from the consequences. It's an emotional scene. There's a great monologue by Ern in that scene, and some of the finest acting that Glover does, not only in the show, but I think in his career. So to sort of further your point that like, why isn't that the end of the show? There's 3 episodes after it. There's the goofy Disney mockumentary one, which to me is like the Kanye line of pop a wheelie on the zeitgeist. That's what that episode is. That's the Glover's ability to do everything at once. Just pops a quick wheelie. It's a victory lap. Is just showing the height of him and all of the collaborative people around him. Definitely a lot of work done by the writers' room on this show and this episode, to make something that funny and derisive of Disney. The master that owns the studio, that owns the company, that owns FX. And then the episode after that is, what is it? Andrew Wyleth. For the episode title's funny. Andrew Wyleth, Alfred's World, which is the episode where Al's just on a farm struggling. And that one is meant to show him that no matter where Al goes, and by extension, no matter where any black men or women go in their lives, there's always going to be struggle. And they're always going to have to overcome it, no matter what the struggle is. In this case, a literal pig. I wrote somewhere in my notes that it's kind of like a strange subversion of Woods, because while Woods is Al being forced into the woods and dealing with the horror there, he willingly goes to a farm in this case, and then the bad outcomes in this series of unfortunate events are all because of his own mistakes and inability to know how to operate a farm or deal with wild hogs. And then It Was All a Dream is sort of the spiritual and, actual end of the show, which functions primarily to get one last series of perfected metaphors and illusions in, with then Darius, who I called earlier the soul of the show, coming all over the top and then thematically wrapping everything up by the end of the episode. I mean, what do you think? Everything for the meaning of the show is all condensed down into that final 5-6 minutes. Like the black-owned sushi restaurant, which is black people appropriating some other style or culture for the sake of creating high art, which is not able to be appreciated by black people, the very people they wish to make the art for.
Right, literally just like, well, I don't necessarily know if I believe in this concept, but then also a black guy doing it, like, whoa, I don't know.
Yeah, not only is it described as poison by Al, but he just wants to go across the street and eat the mass consumer Popeyes, which we know is literal poison. It's just, the show makes us aware of that earlier on. There's something about a line of, high fructose corn syrup being actual poison made by white people to help kill black people. Or the fact that in this scene they mention, Popeyes isn't even owned by any African Americans. It's owned by some Italian guy who made the recipe up years and years ago, and they just profit off of our suffering. And then that is the cycle under which this guy who owns the restaurant says that they all live, the cycle where they will never be able to appreciate this sushi because it was made by black hands, and that inherently makes these people, black people, think that it would be dirty. And even after all that, they still can't eat it because Al is like, yeah, but you're the one that told me that it was, cut from a poisoned fish. But then, the darkness creeps in again because the guy who owns the restaurant is like, all right, lock the doors. We're going to either it's implied that violence is about to take place or they're going to force them to eat this poisonous fish. And then Darius, who's been going on this, otherworldly parallel spiritual journey, breaks in and gets them all out, and they drive away in this ridiculous pink car. Is it a Maserati or something?
Mm-hmm.
Which he reveals that he stole because he's, quote, still in the tank.
I was going to say his decisions were made because he believes that he's still dreaming. So he's just like, oh, well, then I can just do whatever I want.
Yeah.
So obviously I'm going to steal a ridiculous car and save my friends.
So then, after they've eaten Popeyes and they're about to smoke some reefer together, they realize Darius is like tripping out, and they're like, dude, we're really your friends. This is really not a dream. And they all go outside, and Darius starts watching the TV for Judge Judy to see if she's still thick or not. And then we don't see what's on the TV, and he smiles, which is, kind of a even better version of the Inception ending, where presumably if you're watching incorrectly, looking for an on the nose answer, the way you'd watch Inception and go, did the top fall over or not? Just missing the point entirely, that what Darius is seeing on TV is finally the representation that was needed for other people to understand. Like, that's what, thick Judge Judy on TV to me means metaphorically, is the representation. And so if the TV show is the dream of Glover, then therefore the dream has been achieved on TV. And Darius is now unconcerned with whether or not he narratively is still in a dream, because he recognizes that, the dream of this show has succeeded.
That's a lot of layers.
Well, I think this is a very layered show. This is what makes, great art in the 21st century is this is some deep shit that Glover, Murai, these other actors, this entire writer's room have come up with.
It's one thing to cook that up. It's another to like actually put it all together. And then it's another thing to even get it produced, which is really crazy on a network such as FX, which is even crazier that happened.
So thank you, FX, for being able to make this. Excellent that Glover is basically was able to turn his version of fame and the art he was making as a musician into, working for Disney and then using that goodwill to make a show like Atlanta.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to just ranting and raving. I am highly caffeinated.
I saw you got the tea going. No, that's
sipping.
I think that was a perfect encapsulation of that final episode. I kind of just left that pause there because I didn't really have anything more to say. You just kind of tied it all up. Yeah. I know we haven't really discussed Childish Gambino because that's not what we're talking about, but you and I have talked off air that while we can appreciate him as a musical artist, I think you and I both really, really want him to keep making like television, if not film. Like, we want him to do something with the film medium. That's not to say that we like hate his music. I like his music. I know I like his music more than you do, but we just have like more of an appreciation for him as a filmmaker and actor because of this product, because of Atlanta and what this is able to do. Yeah, I think the show is excellent for so many different reasons, and I think it is going to continue to gain notoriety and build up a cult following in years to come.
Yeah, as a comment on Childish Gambino, I think Camp is like a pretty good, if amateurish, rap album, and I think because the internet is just an amazing rap album that for the time of its release, like, sort of conceptually shows the artistic heights that Don Glover is capable of reaching. And Awaken My Love is just like sonically a great fusion of all kinds of different music that you can tell influences Glover, and a lot of that is present in the show that we have not mentioned at all, which is the use of music in the show. Because by and large, throughout the show itself, there's surprisingly very little music. When there is diegetic music, it is often original music that Glover himself made to put into the show to either prove a point or mock a point. And I think the same is true of the beginning and end credits, which make extensive use of a lot of black music, which is certainly not limited to just rap or hip hop. It is the full range of spectrum, all kinds of music. This is one of those shows that, like the, self comparison to Twin Peaks, I can't recommend watching the end credits enough just to listen to the full music, just to break it up more, especially if you're mistakenly binge watching the show. It's just a good vibe check, I suppose.
I do not have any more to add. I think we could discuss this show like extremely in depth. We're not, our goal is not necessarily to perfectly encapsulate it, but more to work our way through, discuss what we like, discuss what we think makes it artful. I would say we were successful with that, but at the same time, I think it's worth pointing out that not everything you and I are going to discuss, Nolan is usually not heaping praise onto something as much as he has for this show. So I just think that's worth pointing out for those of you still with us. We cannot recommend the show enough. It pushes your boundaries, your understanding of America, your understanding of other people's experiences, your understanding of what you could do with a TV show. Just there's so many different layers, like you explained in that, even just in that final episode, as a capstone to what this show is able to do. I know you mentioned this. I mean, you're more than welcome to take the mic from me, but that you wish there was more of it, which I think is like part of a great show, is that you wish there was always more of it, right? It's like eating, it's like going out to eat at like a really nice restaurant and the portions are small, and you eat a number of these like different smaller meals, or at least aspects of the meal, but then you're still not quite full. Like you want to, or you are full, but then the next day you're like, damn, I wish I got that meal again, or I wish I got another meal from that same chef. Like the episodes make you feel full, I would say, but then because they're so good, you just want more of it. So
yeah. I mean, I think that's always going to be the hallmark of a great show, is that it ends in a way where you wish it continued, because you felt there was still not necessarily more to be uncovered, but because it's just everything that it's doing, you can't get anywhere else. And I can't get Atlanta anywhere else. There's no other show like it. And I would say that's true of all of my favorite shows, that when they ended, they end on a great note. They sort of end at the top of their game. I don't think, like, I don't say that I wish there was more, in the sense that, like, I think there was something they had left to uncover, because the fourth season does even at times become thematically redundant with some of the episodes, but by and large, yeah, that's the best praise I can give any TV show, is like, damn, it didn't end too soon. It's just, can't get enough.
Yeah, the direction is excellent. The acting is solid, I would say, for the most part. I know you said Darius, you think his acting is the best.
Yeah, I mean, and not just because he's the character that embodies the most ethereal and ephemeral ideas the show presents. I think he just is able to depict a range of emotions that Donald Glover and Zazie Beetz and Bryan Tyree Henry don't necessarily do. I think all three of them are very good actors. I think Lakeith Stanfield is a great actor. And I think the only thing that will stop him from achieving whatever career heights that he may have his eyes set on is either going to be attributed to his own personal taste in role selection, which seems to be he's a lot more interested in taking roles that are interesting, not commercially viable.
Yeah.
And also just the fact that he's black, which means the roles available are always going to be limited to him, as with the other actors in this.
Yeah,
I think that's said, Bryan Tyree Henry has been nominated for an Oscar, so and Glover won a litany of awards for Atlanta, so maybe all four of them are just destined for greatness as time goes on.
Yeah, I think it's also worth pointing out that because you weren't trying to debase the other actors, you were more just elevating Lakeith Stanfield. I think it's also worth noting it's really easy to watch Atlanta and just think like, oh, Lakeith Stanfield's character, I could do that. I could just act like kind of weird and off kilter and just like being this shamanic, strange person. But I definitely do not think that is the case. He definitely shows like way more of a wide range, like you said. Yeah, I think that just about does it. Go watch Atlanta.